But I think people can get a little weird about that, right? Like, don't tell people when you're fasting. And so people are like, you'd be like, hey, are you fasting? Like, I can't tell you. Yeah, I can't tell you. I also can't tell you, that I got to give in secret. I think, you can take it to a weird degree with it.
Right.
But I think the point is, don't do it to be seen. Don't do it for the praise of others.
Yeah.
Do it as unto the Lord, whether everybody's watching or whether nobody's watching.
Welcome to Whitefields Community Church Sermon Extra. My name's Jason. This is, as normal, this is Pastor Nick with me. He's our lead pastor here at Whitefields Community Church in beautiful Longmont, Colorado. We are in a sermon series in 2 Corinthians entitled Strength and Weakness. And we've been covering that for a while. And if you've missed any of those sermons, make sure that you go to whitefieldschurch.com and take a look at those. Any of the sermon extras as well, take a look at those. And you can find us also on YouTube and on pretty much any podcast app as well. So if you like what you hear, make sure that you smash that like button and subscribe as well. This week we are in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 7 through 18, I believe, 7 through 18, and we're with the sermon entitled
Accepted by God.
Accepted by God. It was an amazing sermon. I remember the sermon, I just don't remember the name.
That's all right. You're killing this intro today, Jason.
Well, I was.
No, you did. No, that was really good.
Thank you.
Hey, where's Mike?
Mike is actually in the sanctuary, and if you notice, we're in a different background right now. Mike's in the sanctuary, and our sanctuary is changing its orientation to a northerly orientation.
Ah, yes.
And we are, it's going to be completely different. So if you're joining us on Sunday morning, it's going to look completely different. Stage is in a different place. Stage is going to look different. Everything is going to be incredible. We're going to add lots of chairs. So there's room for you now. So
That's right.
That's right.
Bring a friend. Let's fill that thing up.
So one of the interesting things you were talking about in your sermon is, which I thought was hysterical, is a description of Paul.
Oh, yeah.
The description of Paul was kind of a mix of Danny DeVito, mixed with maybe a troll. It was a fascinating description of the poor Paul.
Yeah.
And the point is that Paul it wasn't his outward appearance that really struck people as this. We got to follow this guy.
Yeah.
It was what's inside Paul.
Sure.
And which brings up a great question. Let's switch it over to Jesus. In Isaiah 53, it really says there's really nothing about the Messiah that drew people physically to them. It was what was inside that drew people to the Messiah.
Yeah, so that passage is found in Isaiah 53. I'll read it to you. It's talking about the servant of Israel who would come, and we know that that is Jesus, right? Because that's actually, Isaiah 53 is one of the most quoted passages from the Old Testament by the New Testament authors and speakers when they're preaching the gospel. They often reference Isaiah 53, which shows that the earliest Christians understood that Isaiah 53 was fulfilled by Jesus through his death. And, it's one of those passages we often read on like Good Friday and other times when we're talking about what Jesus accomplished. But we often start at like verse 4, which says like, surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. He was stricken by God and afflicted, etc., pierced for our transgressions, and so on. But if you go up before that, it's still talking about him from the beginning of the chapter, Isaiah 53, and it says this, he, the Messiah, grew up before him, God, like a young plant, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him, no beauty that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, as one from whom men hide their faces. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. Now, this is saying multiple things. And you could also ask the question, like, okay, is this talking about when Jesus was being crucified, that he was so mangled and disfigured by the beatings he endured and the whipping, etc.? I think for sure that's what's being referred to in verse 3, but especially when it says in verse 2 that he had no form or majesty that we should look at him and no beauty that we should desire him. This is telling us that Jesus, he came and his attraction was not in his physical appearance. His attraction was in the content of his character, the substance, which is what we talked about on Sunday, is that, there can be such a temptation. And it was a temptation back then. They said, Paul, he's funny looking. He doesn't have a good, presence in the room. And there is this temptation throughout all of history, even with Israel, to look at those who are physically attractive, who look like leaders, right? And say, oh, well, they must be the leaders. But, you see this pattern throughout history where, you got Esau, who's tough and manly and hunts, the kind of guy that I would probably want to hang out with. But instead, they choose Jacob. God chooses Jacob, who's what we might call an avid indoorsman, right? He likes to hang out with mom, and he's not a hunter, doesn't have a lot of, hair on his body. He's kind of like a hairless cat of a man. Yeah. And and yet God chooses him, even though, not to mention, even his character wasn't even that great. But as opposed to Esau, who was willing to forfeit the inheritance, right, the blessing, willing to forfeit that for a bowl of porridge. On the other hand, you have Jacob who, despite his character flaws, he wants that blessing. He pursues it. He seeks it, even if he does so in a bit of a shady manner. And I think there's something to be said for that, right? Like, do you want it? Do you not care, right? So it's looking at the content of the heart, the substance that's there, as opposed to just the outward appearance. So we see that with Jesus. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting that, why would people be attracted to somebody, who's, not physically, a great specimen? For example, in our culture, that's exactly how it is. We are drawn to people for their outside appearance. I mean, look at just social media. In social media, all the big social media stars are just these pretty people. And inside, it's like, yeesh.
It's hard to be an influencer if you're, looking like Paul looked, right?
Yeah.
You don't see a lot of influencers looking like Paul.
Danny DeVito does not have a lot of followers, apparently.
Yeah. Well,
Well, he might actually.
Yeah, he might. But, there's just not a lot of influencers out there looking like Paul looked.
Yeah.
And, you see that Paul's saying, hey, I'm not really trying to draw followers with my, magnetic good looks. Mm-hmm. I'm coming with the content of the gospel. Let that be what draws you.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love that. For example, one thing that I look at is, for example, the book of John. We just went through it. And, you look at chapter 3 where he's talking to Nicodemus. And what draws Nicodemus, who's this theologian, he's a Pharisee, which is, and what draws him to Jesus? And Jesus is speaking the truth. Mm. He's speaking what needs to be said at a time where people aren't talking the truth. They're talking their own truths, and Pharisees especially. And then in chapter 4, the woman on the well, what draws her? Jesus' compassion. And, I think throughout the book of John, you can kind of see that Jesus is speaking the truth, what people need. He's loving them. It's his compassion. It's his heart. And he's with people, and that's what's drawing people to Jesus. It's not that Jesus is this, magnetic good looks, like The Chosen. You have this handsome guy who has smiles and he's wonderful looking, and everyone loves him and stuff, which isn't a bad thing.
I haven't seen it.
But
I don't usually watch TV. I mostly just read the Bible, Jason.
Well,
are you more of a TV guy?
No, well, yeah, I watched the Bible. It's really, I can't read.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, just
cool.
Podcasts,
gotcha. Yeah. Gotcha. All right.
But so I think it's really important that that God looks at the heart.
Yeah.
And he's not It's not our outside. And that's really good for us, I think, that God is not looking at our outside.
Praise the Lord. I thank the Lord every day for that. Yeah.
It's a blessing.
Yeah. So, I think the point there too for us is really important, that we want to be focused on the content of our character, not just on what people see. Like I was talking about, on Zoom, you don't actually have to clean your house. You just have to clean the part of your house that people can see, right? And people let that bleed into every area of their life, where I don't actually have to be a godly person. I just have to be godly when other people are watching, right? I just need to know how to talk the talk, not necessarily walk the walk. And we remember what Jesus told us, right? That there is a Father who sees in secret, and he will reward you. Do it unto him. If we were talking about this, don't let your right hand know what your left hand's doing, or I can't remember which hand it is that's not supposed to know what the other one's doing. But the point is that you're supposed to do it in such a way. But I think people can get a little weird about that, right? Don't tell people when you're fasting. And so people are you'd be hey, are you fasting? I can't tell you. Yeah, I can't tell you. I also can't tell you, that I got to give in secret. I think, you can take it to a weird degree with it.
Right.
But I think the point is, don't do it to be seen. Don't do it for the praise of others. Yeah. Do it as unto the Lord. Whether everybody's watching or whether nobody's watching, be a person who has integrity, a person who is without wax, as we talked about on Sunday.
Yeah, a waxless man.
Yeah.
So, I think that's a good thing. I don't wax my legs, so I am without wax.
You are without wax,
yes. Yeah. But I think the great importance is that we need to be working on our inside. We need to be working on having a character that matches up with God's character.
Yeah, and remembering the gospel as the impetus for that, not just saying, hey, do better, try harder. Now get on with it, and let's see if you do it.
It's overflowing.
It's an overflow, right? It's a response. And by the power of the Holy Spirit within us, now we can do that because of what Jesus has done.
Awesome. I think that's a great topic, and I'm glad that we covered it. And I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that were wondering the same thing. And that's your focus. Make sure that out of an overflowing of our hearts, that we are adhering to the gospel and allowing it to change what's inside. So don't worry about your outside. Well, worry about that maybe a little bit. All right.
Yeah. Is this, maybe it's an encore right now.
Yeah, encore.
Encore, here we go. I always used to, and I remember talking to people, sometimes you get people who swing to the other extreme,
right?
That's
what I was thinking when I said that.
Yeah, and you know what they'll do? They'll be like, well, I don't care, what anybody thinks about anything I do because I'm only living for God. I'm like, yeah, but you are interacting with other people. And, if you've been called to be an ambassador for Christ, it might help if you took a shower. And it might help, if you weren't rude to people, that might be cool. And,
that's right.
So should we care what other people think? Yes, but for the right reason. If you're doing it for a missional reason because you're an ambassador of Christ, and you don't want to put unnecessary obstacles in the way of people hearing what you're really there to share with them or what you really want your life to be known for, well, yeah. But if you're doing it because you're trying to build your identity by seeking people's acceptance, that's a different issue.
Yeah, very good. Very good. We'll leave it at that.
All right.
All right. Join us next week for another Sermon Extra. And until then, smash that like button and subscribe. You guys have a great week.